Anastasia, you are a registered nutritional therapist and the founder of Whole Mind Health, which is an online tailored health program that supports people suffering with mental health conditions tackle their symptoms using a functional medicine approach.
That's me.
Yeah, that's you. Okay, so I do know what functional medicine approach is, because I have to say that we went through the same training, and we actually probably sat next to each other for a while. So could you explain what functional medicine is?
Yeah, absolutely. So functional medicine is, I would say, a branch of integrative medicine, founded in the States. And essentially, in a nutshell, what it is for me is just looking at the underlying drivers of poor health and looking at ways to support the body using nutrition, lifestyle, etc. Through that perspective, looking at what could be driving and looking a bit further upstream rather than downstream, which is typically what Western medicine does. It treats the downstream consequences, so symptoms, rather than looking upstream at what the causes of those symptoms could be. And nutrition obviously is a really big, as we both know, a really big part of it. And some people think, oh, how can nutrition impact your mental health? Are those two things completely unrelated? But we now know that there's a very, very strong body of research to show that nutrition is really a pivotal part of mental health. And in Australia and New Zealand, it is now a part of their kind of mainstream psychiatric care. So
wow,
yeah,
and so advanced.
That only happened recently, and it was all down to the work of Dr. Felice Jacka at I think it's called the Food and Mood Center in Australia, I believe. And all of that kind of body of nutritional psychiatric research has now led to that, and hopefully at some point it will lead to that happening here in the UK and Europe, because I think it's part of the future really, and needs to be asked. People need to be asking their patients, what they're eating and how they're living their lives, otherwise things aren't going to get resolved. Yeah, some of it has a lot to do with the second brain, absolutely. Yeah, so that's one of the things that we look at when I am seeing a new client and I'm trying to determine and kind of do the detective work as to what could be driving symptoms for this person. Sometimes we're looking as well at the gut microbiome and how that could be playing a role in brain health and things like brain inflammation, which can be triggered by inflammation in the stomach or in the gut, generally speaking. And so, yes, the second brain in the gut, as we know, it plays a really important role in the first brain.
Absolutely. As in the brain from the head.
Yes,
the
exactly.
First brain is the brain from
brain,
the head. The one
brain.
when you think brain, that's the one behind the skull.
Yeah, okay. Exactly.
But how did you get into specializing in the area of mental health?
I think like everyone that tends to specialize in a certain area, it's because of their own experiences. And so I don't hide away from the fact that I suffered greatly throughout my 20s. And I use that experience, to talk about how I recovered and how I can help other people. And one of the main things for me was anxiety. That was a really big factor for me. And I went through the experience of having psychiatric medications, and they're not really doing much for me. And that's not to say it doesn't for other people. I know that, psychiatric medication can play a really important role in stabilizing, at least in the initial, part of someone's healing journey. But for me, I felt like it was disconnecting. It was disconnecting me from what I was needing to process. And I just felt very numb, which for some people is actually really necessary. But I think for me at that point in my journey, I needed to process those emotions or, feelings, whatever. And it was just, I think I just felt really, really strange. It almost felt I needed to cry, like the urge to cry was there, but it just wasn't happening. It was almost like there was this disconnect. So I went through that experience, and I think I've always been interested in integrative medicine, or just natural approaches to health, and have various people in my family that have gone in that direction. And so I was interested, and I just started reading basically, and realized that I wanted to retrain eventually, and that's what led me to studying at the College of Naturopathic Medicine. And so, yeah, here I am today. I think I've been working as a nutritional therapist, as you know, at the same time as you, so past like what, 5-6 years or so. And since I, was studying at the College of Naturopathic Medicine, I began to work at Food for the Brain, which is a charity that generates awareness about the link between mental health and nutrition. And it was through my experience working there as a communications manager that I learned loads, obviously. And then I started working at the clinic, at the Brain Biocenter, which was, the kind of clinical portion of the charity. And that's when I think I just realized a year ago that actually I need to just specialize in one area, and I need to focus my efforts in attracting a certain type of client, and that is the type of client that I really enjoy working with, and that's people that are suffering with mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, the whole spectrum really. And it isn't an overnight fix. We both know that, and that's the same for any health condition. But I tell you, it works. It really, really works.
I can totally agree with you on that, because for me, when I was younger, I had a few health issues, but depression was one of them. And I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism, which I know was one of the symptoms is depression. And then when I realized that gluten might have an impact on the whole thyroid and depression thing, and I cut gluten, I can't say my symptom went away, but improved dramatically. And that was the beginning of having this link between nutrition and mental health. So yes. So how do you typically work with your clients?
Using the functional medicine approach, what we always do is we take a comprehensive case history. So we look into the person's medical history, we build a timeline, we work out what has happened throughout that person's life to potentially lead them to where they are today in present life, and how they're experiencing their health in present life. And so it's looking at triggers, life events, traumas, looking at infections, all these sorts of things that can lead to imbalances like gut microbiome imbalances. It can lead to blood sugar imbalances, things like that. And then building that timeline, we work out, okay, what could be mediating these issues for this person. And then based on that, I start to create a plan. And often I'll use tests. So part of functional medicine is also looking at functional testing to understand, just, I suppose, to take the guesswork out and to give us a little bit more data to work with, so that we're not just shooting in the dark.
Yeah, and also mental health can be very subjective. If you don't feel pain, you don't know where it comes from. So what kind of tests are you using?
It's so great that you mentioned that, because and that's something I was talking about with another colleague of mine last week, is that when it comes to symptoms of mental health, so depression and anxiety, just to be, the most common symptoms, they are often signs of inflammation in the brain. And when we're looking at conditions like musculoskeletal conditions or arthritis, things like that, they're generally symptoms of inflammation in the joints or in the muscles.
Absolutely.
So we feel the pain from that inflammation. But with brain inflammation, it's not pain, it's not an ouch, it's more like, okay, brain fog, really low mood, anxiety, panic attacks, and so that's what I think people need to understand, is that it's not all in your head, so to speak. They are real physiological symptoms that are driven by physiological drivers. And nutrition and lifestyle can play a role in helping to modify those physiological drivers.
I wanted to say, sometimes it's really hard to believe that we've got brain fog, because we have been living with brain fog for a while. So for us, it's how we are. But once we do something and then we realize, actually, now we've got clear thoughts, then we can realize actually it was brain fog. And that's why it's tricky, and we need to do those tests to see that we have this low-grade inflammation. Please tell us
Yeah.
about the testing.
Yeah, sure. So it's probably the same test that you use. You know, we know
Probably.
it's always similar things that come up for different health conditions. But
Yes.
one of the tests that I do often is a stool test. So as we briefly touched on earlier on, the gut microbiome plays a really big role in mental health, brain health. So the gut microbiome, that relates to the kind of ecosystem of microorganisms that live in your gut. And we know that they play a role in interacting with the second brain, which is the enteric nervous system that's, you know, kind of built into the lining of your intestines, essentially. And that nervous system communicates to your brain. It's an independent nervous system, but it communicates to your brain via the vagus nerve. And so imbalances in the gut microbiome can inevitably have a negative impact on that communication, and can lead to things like neuroinflammation, can lead to imbalances in your neurotransmitters, and also just general kind of chronic inflammation, because also something else that can go wrong in the gut is intestinal permeability, as we know a lot about leaky gut, which is not just, it's not just a kind of, how do I put it, like a fake term. It's a real, it's a real thing. It's a real thing. Your gut can become permeable, and that can lead to chronic low-grade inflammation, which can affect the brain negatively. So one of the things I do is a stool test, and that way we get to see, what sort of imbalances there are, whether there are any gastric secretion insufficiencies that could be, leading to issues with breaking down and absorbing the nutrients in your food. And we're looking at also any inflammatory markers that could be also creating problems like intestinal permeability. So that's one of the things that I test often. And I find that test gives us lots of information to work with. So stool test is one thing I look at. And then other tests I tend to look at as well, thyroid tests. So you mentioned yourself that thyroid played a massive role in your depression. Well, I think with most women that suffer with depression, sometimes the thyroid can be playing quite a significant role in that. And so looking at a comprehensive thyroid panel rather than a panel that you're going to get through your GP at the NHS, where they're just going to measure TSH and T4, and normally just TSH, really, just at the beginning. And as we both know, that doesn't give us a whole lot of information.
No.
So I will often do a comprehensive thyroid panel that includes not only TSH and T4, but also T3, which is essentially the most biologically active thyroid hormone. And also antibodies. So if someone has autoimmunity, then we need to know if their antibodies are raised, and how raised they are, and if they're having a negative impact on the thyroid and its ability to produce thyroid hormone. And why does that impact mental health? Because thyroid hormone is just so incredibly important for many things: metabolism, temperature control, brain health. So that's one of the things I do. And often what I do see is just an inability for someone to convert T4 to T3 optimally. So T4, as we both know, is the most important, well, not the most important, the most abundant thyroid hormone that's produced by the thyroid. And then that eventually gets converted down to T3 through the liver and the kidneys. And T3 is the most biologically active, and so we need enough of that to exert its impact on the body. And if there isn't enough of that, but you have normal amounts of T4, then probably there's a conversion issue there. We've got to look at the cofactor nutrients that help to convert T4 to T3, and that's things like zinc, selenium. There's two key examples, and a lot of people are unfortunately deficient in those two minerals. So that's another thing that I do as well. What else do? I do homocysteine testing. So homocysteine is an amino acid that is a byproduct of protein metabolism, but it's most importantly a byproduct of a cycle called methylation. And methylation plays a really important role in various aspects of health, one of which is mental health, because it plays a role in neurotransmitter production and balance. And so in a normal circumstance, homocysteine gets recycled back into methionine in this cycle, methylation. But when it isn't, it can accumulate, and homocysteine, unfortunately, is neurotoxic. So often homocysteine can be quite high, and if it is high, then we can confer from that that someone has an issue with methylation, and therefore they may need some more cofactor nutrients like methylated B vitamins to help propel that cycle forward. And it might also signify that someone might have some gene variants that could be playing a negative role in methylation or their ability to methylate.
Do you find that food intolerance tests can help? Because I know sometimes you can get the symptoms from just common food intolerance. Is it something you use?
I actually used to use it often, but I actually stopped using food intolerance testing. I found it to be a little bit unreliable, if I'm totally honest. And what I often found is that people would come up with these really random intolerances, and what that really showed is probably intestinal permeability. And so what I'm really trying to find out is to what degree is someone, suffering with intestinal permeability. And I prefer, if someone who are working with a budget, I prefer to do the stool test over a food intolerance test and just do the gold standard elimination diet, which seems to just work for most people, rather than testing and then them seeing all these foods that they're coming up red in, and then getting a bit panicked about all these foods that they suddenly have to not eat, So it can just be a bit restrictive sometimes, and you can get yourself into a bit of a rabbit hole with a client that might already be a little bit nervous about restricting their diet. So I just find it not to be so incredibly useful all the time, and so that's why I actually stopped doing it, and prefer to do the stool test.
What would you say are some of the most common drivers of poor mental health that you see in your practice?
So we've already spoken about some of them. We already spoke about the gut-brain connection, and imbalances in the gut microbiome, etc. We spoke about the thyroid. Another thing that I see, which is probably the most common, is blood sugar imbalances, and that's across the board, with every single mental health condition is always going to be an issue.
Any I think condition, it's usually triggered by some kind of blood sugar dysregulation.
Exactly. And so the way that I try to explain it to my clients is that with blood sugar, there's two things that are going on. So your brain is a very energy demanding organ. It's the most energy demanding organ in the body. And so any fluctuations in energy, which are mediated by your blood sugar levels, your brain is going to be the first organ that feels that impact. And so it's really important that you're providing your brain with sustainable sources of energy. And so that's one of the reasons why. The other thing is that when your blood sugar levels are fluctuating, what inevitably also happens is that because there's such an intrinsic link between your blood sugar levels and your nervous system, blood sugar dips and highs, so peaks and troughs in your blood sugar levels, will have a negative impact on your adrenal glands. And so your adrenal glands are these little glands that sit on top of your kidneys, and they produce cortisol and adrenaline, as well as other things, but mainly cortisol and adrenaline. And when your blood sugar levels are dipping, because probably you've had maybe a little bit too much carbohydrate that hasn't been balanced out with enough protein, what happens is your adrenal glands produce cortisol and adrenaline. That leads to blood sugar stores being released from glycogen stores, basically, so that your blood sugar levels are nicely regulated afterwards. But of course, those two hormones also play a role in activating the emotional center of your brain called the amygdala. So that can lead to things like anxiety, can lead to panic attacks. And when your nervous system is already dysregulated, which for most people that have mental health conditions have, dysregulated nervous systems, then you really just want to be sending messages of safety to your body. You don't want to be sending messages of, erratic, energy levels, which are going to have a negative impact on your nervous system, and which are going to kind of, trigger your nervous system to go into its fight or flight state, which is essentially what cortisol and adrenaline do. They send your nervous system into fight or flight. And so that's another kind of angle that I try to explain to my clients, why it's so important to make sure that blood sugar levels are balanced, because it has such intrinsic role in stabilizing the nervous system, but also in stabilizing the energy that is going to the brain. And I think some people probably think that they're already eating, you know, a blood sugar balancing diet, but then when we look at what they're really eating, it's things like granola, it's things like fruit juices, lots of dried fruit, which aren't the worst things you can eat, but we also know that they can significantly lead to a massive spike in your blood sugar levels. And when you're already suffering with a nervous system imbalance, then that's going to just exacerbate it. And so it's just about really making sure that someone is prioritizing protein, complex carbohydrate, and fiber intake in general, and making sure that they're combined together in every meal, so that they aren't peaking and troughing throughout the day, and it's not also leading to anxiety and panic attacks. When I'm working with someone, is one of the main things that I work with is that blood sugar balance.
Now we're going to bring the menopause and midlife
yes,
to the conversation,
menopause.
because it was about mental health in midlife. So how would you say is the menopause affecting the brain and you know, therefore mental health? Or is menopause unrelated to any mental health issues?
Menopause is a tricky time. I mean, I'm not there yet, obviously, but it's a tricky time. So estrogen plays a really important role in brain health. And that's why so many women suffer with mood fluctuations, memory loss throughout that time. It really is an incredibly pervasive hormone, in the sense that it plays a role in glucose metabolism in the brain, so glucose utilization in the brain. So again, blood sugar imbalances are going to be even more highlighted and important throughout menopause. So really important that someone is getting, you know, sustainable sources of energy, and they're not exacerbating that. We know that estrogen impacts neural connectivity. We know that it also impacts white matter. So many things. Serotonin receptors as well. We know that it mediates serotonin availability. So there are so many ways that estrogen impacts the brain. And I think that women that tend to feel the most negative symptoms throughout menopause are those that probably have experienced imbalances in their hormones up until that point. And the most common imbalance that we see nowadays is estrogen dominance throughout, you know, our kind of pubescent years and throughout, you know, up until perimenopause. And why is that the case? Well, many things. With estrogens in our environment. Sorry, you go ahead.
No, I wanted to say that what you're saying with all these complicated terms for perhaps some people is that basically there is a physical reason linked to estrogen level why, you know, women going through the menopause or perimenopause are actually having some mental health conditions or symptoms. It can be explained, basically. It's a bit complex because it's medical, using lots of complicated terms, but it is backed by science.
I think it's just important to know that estrogen, broadly speaking, has a really broad impact on the brain, and a lot of women feel like they're going mad throughout menopause. And there are some key reasons why, and that's one of the reasons is that, you know, estrogen suddenly plummets, and so does progesterone. We know plays a really important role in GABA, in the production of GABA in the brain and the receptivity to GABA. So
can you share what GABA does? Just for those who don't know that.
I was just about to say. So GABA is it's an inhibitory neurotransmitter. It's the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain. What that means is that we've got this kind of group of excitatory neurotransmitters. That's things like serotonin, dopamine, adrenaline, and then we've got the inhibitory neurotransmitter GABA, which helps to keep things in balance and helps to prevent overexcitation of the brain. You know, when you've had that glass of wine in the evening and you get that lovely kind of like warm, fuzzy feeling, and it's like nice, you feel nice and relaxed, that's GABA. So that's what alcohol stimulates. It stimulates GABA, and that's why some people feel the need to have a glass of wine after a long day of work, because they're actually craving GABA, they're not craving alcohol. And progesterone plays a really important role in the receptivity to GABA. And so that's why a lot of women and young women tend to suffer with issues in the latter half of their cycle, because there isn't enough progesterone sometimes. So sometimes they feel very irritable. Sometimes they feel very, depressed, anxious, because sometimes progesterone isn't robust enough. And we know that plays an important role in helping to mitigate those symptoms.
In perimenopause, it's actually the progesterone level that starts to dip before the estrogen level starts.
Yeah.
So it's not just about estrogen; it's estrogen and progesterone. And has testosterone an effect on the brain?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not
absolutely.
It's all about
it's all of the hormones. I think everyone. Yes, often there's a highlight on estrogen, but we know that all the hormones play an important role. And testosterone, it's one of those hormones that we underestimate as women. I think we need to make sure we've got optimal testosterone levels.
We are women, but we still produce some testosterone.
Yeah,
so it's
exactly. Testosterone is not only important for libido, but it's also important for muscular health as well, for just vitality, energy, I typically see women that have issues with testosterone that have been chronically stressed, because we also know that cortisol is made from the same precursor compound to sex hormones, steroid hormones, so testosterone, DHEA, progesterone, etc.
And we should add that it starts from cholesterol. So if
it starts from cholesterol,
the cholesterol from your diet, you are not likely to produce any of these hormones that we really need to be healthy mentally and physically.
Exactly. Yes, not enough people know that. Chronic stress is going to essentially shunt the priority down to creating cortisol and not creating enough progesterone or creating enough DHEA and testosterone, which are really important, as we know, for health and mental health. So managing stress is also something else that is so incredibly important in every life stage, but particularly throughout menopause, because obviously we also know the adrenal glands play a role in producing sex hormones. So when there is a priority to deal with stress in the environment over priority to create sex hormones, well, that's going to that's going to take precedence, basically.
Exactly. And during menopause, the ovary starts producing the most of the estrogen and the adrenals take over. So if the adrenals are producing stress hormones, then they can't produce estrogen or a different type of estrogen instead. Thank you for confirming on that. So now, do you have any tips? Do you support women in midlife suffering from mental health from your angle?
The thing I would say is that you've got to work out what are your triggers, what are your underlying drivers, and so that might mean looking at doing very simple things which we already inherently know, intuitively know we shouldn't be eating. So removing refined carbohydrates, removing simple carbohydrates in general.
So blood sugar management, basically.
Blood sugar management, exactly. Yeah. So making sure that you're getting lots of good quality protein in your diet, also good quality complex carbohydrates, so slow releasing carbohydrates, lots of phytonutrients, so lots of color and diversity. And that isn't only going to play an important role in blood sugar management, but also in providing nutrient density, and providing antioxidants as well. So antioxidants are incredibly important for mitigating things like oxidative stress in the body, inflammation that occurs from oxidative stress. And we know that those physiological kind of mechanisms can exacerbate symptoms of menopause and mental health in particular, because as we mentioned, brain inflammation, neuroinflammation is one of the primary drivers of depression and brain fog. And so to mitigate that, we need to make sure that we are providing the body with lots of antioxidants and lots of nutrient density to kind of keep the balance in check. The other thing is environmental toxic load is really important. So making sure that you are choosing the right hygiene products, beauty products, which don't have all those kind of pollutants that we know we need to be avoiding, that are endocrine disruptors is what we call them. So what that means is that they inhibit optimal hormone balance and hormone physiology. Plastics. Obviously, there are things that we can't control, you know, pollution. We can't control that so much. But pesticides, if you can opt for organic food, that would be better. So we want to reduce the toxic load as much as possible, and that's going to help with liver health. And we know that liver health is really intrinsically important for hormone balance.
And if you have to pick one vegetable,
just one.
The one, yeah. Because we always know. I mean, it's all about plant-based, you know, diet at the moment, and I think it's not enough emphasis on meat and fish and all these animal products that really bring a lot of nutrients that are not in plants. But if someone doesn't like plants but wants to eat plants for their mental health, which one would it be?
Broccoli sprouts.
Broccoli sprouts.
Broccoli sprouts, yes.
So it's not fresh. You have to process them.
You have to sprout them. Yes, you have to sprout the seeds. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you can actually get them in some health food shops. You can get broccoli sprouts in little boxes, but you can also just get the seeds and sprout them yourself at home, or just broccoli. I mean, but broccoli sprouts are kind of like the next level of nutrient density.
More dense. Okay, wonderful. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Where can they find you?
Oh yeah, sure. So either on Instagram. So the handle is Anastasia_whole-mind-health. My email address is info@anastasianutrition.com.
Okay.
But you can find that all on my page anyway on Instagram. wholemindhealth.co.uk is the website. So that's where you can find me. And if anyone has any questions that they want to ask me privately, you know, regarding mental health, then please feel free also to just message me. Yeah.
And I believe you offer a complimentary discovery call as well.
Yes. So that one thing I do prior to working with anyone is just to set up an introductory call, and it's really just to understand a little bit more about what the person is needing support with. We work out some initial kind of suspicions of what could be driving it for this person, and then we just, you know, talk about how I can help them essentially, and work out whether I'm the best practitioner for them. Because I don't do ad hoc consultations. I only work with people through programs now, because I have found just working through over the years that, you know, we both know that nutrition isn't an overnight fix, and most things aren't anyway. Even medications aren't overnight fixes. So it takes time for things to unravel. It takes time for someone to get used to a new way of eating, a new way of living. Or just you know, integrating new habits into their everyday life. And if we are doing tests, then it takes time to also do tests and the test results to come back, and then tailored plans to then be implemented. So what I do is 3-month and 6-month programs, which basically offer a container of time for that process to evolve. And you know, I think it's better for the person in terms of their compliance as well to go through a program. So as I say quite often, that 80% of the work is down to the client, 20% of it is me just guiding the client through the process. So I try and coach them through it, but really and truly it has to be them and their willingness and their kind of dedication to make those changes.
All the hard work is in between the sessions.
Exactly.
And also I'd like to say that you have a wonderful newsletter with amazing recipes. Yes, I am part of your newsletter. And so that's also a good idea to sign up, you know, if you're not sure if that's for you or not, but you know, you've got some really good tips. And my thing is menopause, but you know, I think I don't know enough about mental health, and it's really important to find out, you know, what specialists are doing, and I always learn something. So I highly recommend your newsletter as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time today, Anastasia.
No problem.
It's been a pleasure to have you.
Likewise.
And explain us how we work, and hopefully we will meet up soon.
Yes, I hope so too. Thank you so much for having me.